This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. Welcome into the Huskies Warming House Podcast, episode 159 here in the Den. Nick Max and Noah Grant coming to you, recording late on a Monday evening in the last week of April, pushing into, oddly enough, actually 2 weeks from today, I will have completed all of my classes and I will be moving to a new apartment and getting ready to start my new job about a month and a half later, which is kind of crazy. You'd think that when you get done with nursing school, you'd be able to jump in and work right away. Legally, no, that's not actually the case. So bit of a waiting period here. But what we haven't been waiting long enough for, apparently, is some really good Minnesota Wild first round action. It's funny, Nick, for a team that was supposed to be down and out of it and not have a sniff of a chance in a first round at all. It's been interesting. To say the least.
Well, that wasn't us saying that, but anyway,
nobody listens to what we have to say.
That's very true. But for those who have bought into that media blitz that the Dallas Stars were this unbeatable, force, kind of eating their own cake right now, to say the least.
Cake sounds good though, doesn't it?
It does actually. But, to our point, right, which we brought up is that if you really broke down past the numbers, right, this series was very even. If you really broke down the lineups, goaltending, minus Marc-Andre Fleury, also,
what's funny, Nick? This series, at the time of recording, happens to still be even. How crazy is that?
Crazy.
2-2 is the series. We'll obviously dive deep into that one. Should be pretty good. That's going to be the bulk of the main portion of our show. We're going to dive into games 1, 2, 3, and 4 because they've played 4 so far. Of course, game 5 coming on Tuesday, which will be the release of this show. And then game 6, of course, in St. Paul on Thursday, and then Saturday if needed for game number 7. And then in the main portion of the show as well too, we'll just kind of get you caught up on some of the bigger player moves in the NCAA. A couple of movements in the NCHC and the WCHA and the women's side, not too much, but St. Cloud did get some pretty interesting news in the past couple of weeks that I think we do want to discuss, of course. And then the extra ice session, we're going to continue with the NHL playoffs. The first round has been interesting, to say the least. Everything is interesting here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. So without further ado, we'll get you started with what should be probably a decently lengthy Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup and Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Illustrated Weekly Roundup here, Noah, and some NHL news that's not playoff related. The Kings and the Coyotes are actually going to play some preseason games in Australia, not Austria. Not in Europe, where they have done that a few times. They're going to play down under, actually at Rod Laver Arena, of all things considered. Yes, the home of the Australian Open, a tennis tournament that I watch every single year. This will take place September 23rd and 24th. So this is, how about this? NHL really looking to expand the game, quite literally.
Still more seats probably than a normal Coyotes game, but
find me one that's less, right? So this will continue to be part of the NHL's more recent sort of annual global series. So definitely a new stop. And, I think one St. Cloud State Huskies player might actually enjoy this. We're talking Zach Okabe, who spent some time in Australia. So how about this? Noah, that the NHL continues to embark on new territory.
Yeah, will Logan Cooley be there? That's really the question. I think that has been surrounding Arizona among a number of things that apparently are of great interest related to the city of Tempe, I'm sure. But yeah, no, this is really awesome. Australia is not a place that I think of when I think of hockey. And really, actually, when I think of Australia, I think of roller hockey. That's actually kind of something that has kind of grown in recent years there. But I mean, this is away from, the mainland pieces, like you mentioned, of Europe, of Asia. This is an interesting thing. I think this is a great expansion for the National Hockey League. We're finally getting to that point where the global series has kind of gotten back into full swing, and we pushed away from the traditional European market too. And then, kind of have moved further and further southeast, I guess, if you're looking at a world map in terms of a flat 2D printed map, which is not how the world actually is, but you get the gist. We're moving farther and farther from the United States in some senses. It's cool. It's awesome. I think it'll be a really unique event. I wonder how interesting it'll be to keep ice down there, obviously, too. I wonder how experienced they are in Australia with ice. Not to say that people in Australia can't be good at making ice and making hockey rinks, but it's a very warm market. We had the same conversation 25 years ago with hockey in Arizona, Florida, now Vegas, California, right? And everybody's figured it out. So seems like it's the next step for the National Hockey League. And why not pick two teams that come from warm climates as it is? Should be pretty exciting.
Should be. I'll be interested in the fan interest, especially down there in that non-traditional market. Some other little tidbits here, Noah. The U.S. women win the Worlds against Canada 6-3. That trend that we keep seeing where whoever wins the medal in the preliminary round is the loser in the medal round. That continues to be a thing between these two squads. So congrats to the U.S. women on their gold medal, again, 6-3, the victorious score. Not so good. Iowa Wild eliminated from the American Hockey League's playoffs. And with that being said, the Iowa Wild, they're going to be making some coaching changes. In fact, full scale coaching changes. Head coach Tim Army and his staff are out as part of sweeping changes for the Iowa Wild. This one caught me by surprise a little bit. Yeah. And not to say that Tim Army, granted, you can look at the records maybe don't jump off the page with you, but I have a sense, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that this move isn't necessarily about the wins and losses, but more about the development side of things. And when you look at specifically guys like Marco Rossi, when you look at guys like Adam Beckman, Mason Shaw, guys who have made the jump, but maybe guys who haven't, do you get the sense that this is more to do with the development side of things than necessarily the record on the ice?
Well, it's interesting because the record is kind of reflective, no shit, Sherlock, of the team that's in front, on the ice. But what I mean by that is Tim Army, at least it kind of felt like, is that he's finally kind of turned a corner where he's had some of these guys that have made that jump, and subsequently his team has gotten worse as a result because of the fact that those guys are now moving up to the big club. So it's kind of a double-edged sword where the more successful you are in the development process, the more you almost hurt yourself in some senses because the guys are going up to the next level. So I always kind of thought that Tim Army had a pretty good feel for the temperature of that. But like you mentioned, the record in playoff success or lack thereof kind of speaks for itself in that regard. You wonder if it's not even maybe so much a development piece, but more of a command of the room kind of thing. Is the development mentally, and as a group reflected a little bit more than on a personal, individual case by case basis. And those things kind of happen. He's definitely a guy, there's no doubt about it, that would get a shot, I think, at the collegiate level or somewhere in professional hockey. He is not going to not have a home for long, I don't think, if he looks to try to continue his coaching resume. So, I think this one kind of caught us a little bit by surprise. I really wonder where Iowa is going to be headed with this one. It'll be kind of a odd little summer for them. It's been a while since we've really had a discussion like this for the little club.
Really has. And, speaking of the Wild, right, we'll talk about how their off seasons may be linked with obviously sweeping changes coming for the big club whenever the season ends. We'll discuss that obviously a little bit more later with the current playoffs and everything else of that nature. But speaking of milestones, whether it's good or bad, right, Noah, let's talk about Erik Karlsson, sixth defenseman ever with a 100-point season producing. How about this? The first since Brian Leetch in 1992. That is, check the math, 31 years ago.
I wasn't
Is
even
that
alive.
right? Yeah, I was. I was. If I'm dating myself, I'm sure you knew that already. How about this? The other.
I was going to say it was when you were in diapers, but that could have been last year too. So
That could have been. Yeah. Depends on which side of the coin you're looking at. How about other players that have had 100-point seasons, right? Al McInnes, again, known for his, at the time, probably the hardest slap shot in the league back in the early to late 90s. Paul Coffey, he did it 5 times. Dennis Potvin and Bobby Orr did it 6 times as the other players to reach that 100-point milestone as a defenseman in the National Hockey League.
Yeah.
Speaking, and, odds are that are pretty small, but speaking of odds, the NHL draft lottery odds are also set here, Noah. Lottery set to take place on Monday, May 8th. Right now, the number one consensus overall pick is Connor Bedard. Then the number 2, at least on most draft boards, is Adam Fantilli, again, the sophomore forward for the University of Michigan. So let's talk about odds, right? The Anaheim Ducks have the best chance to land the number 1 overall pick. Again, they were the worst placed team in the regular season. They have 18.5% chance. Columbus 13.5%, Chicago 11.5%, San Jose 9.5%, Montreal 8.5%. The list goes down from there. But the big thing here, Noah, what we have to remember is no matter who wins the draft lottery, you can only move up 3 spots. So even if, say, someone like, Detroit 5%, Pittsburgh 1.5%, Calgary somehow can get it. At least Toronto, we know, won't have a chance to, have a ball click off the post that for the ball to go up, so they can't win it. But no matter who does, can only move up 3 spots as a maximum. Again, the best odds going to the Ducks, the worst record in the regular season.
Yeah, you can only move up 10 spots. So Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Nashville, and Calgary can't. No, it's 10 spots. Guarantee you it's 10. So it's 10 spots, and
I don't think it's 10.
This is coming straight from the Athletic article. I'm going to tell you this right now. You can only move up 10 spots. So that means Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Nashville, and Calgary cannot pick first, as well as Ottawa. But it's actually the Arizona Coyotes pick from the Senators. So Arizona will actually pick twice in this draft. So kind of interesting. So this means the Ducks, like you mentioned, 18.5% lottery odds, but they actually have a 25.5% chance of actually picking first because you're losing those bottom 5 teams in the draft potential for the lottery as well too. So it'll be interesting. I really wonder if this is the year where Anaheim, getting a chance to pick first, will pick first and have that opportunity. Both Anaheim and Columbus, as the top 2 teams, could really use him. I think seeing him go to a place like Chicago would be kind of tough considering the success that the Hawks have had for so long. So, and then San Jose and Montreal, both teams that also could use a high flying scorer like Bedard, who shattered records, with his performance over 230 points or something like that in his tenure. I mean, just a guy that has been insanely productive. So how about this? Did you vindicate me or did you not? You seem to be searching quite heavily. I can send you the article if you're if you're searching quite heavily here. But yeah, in Arizona actually in a really good spot too, 7.5% to pick first in the lottery. And then they also are around that, what would be a number 11, I think 10 or 11 right now as it stands, with the Ottawa pick as well too. So in a very deep draft class that's coming up this year, Arizona actually has put themselves in a decent spot when it comes to, multiple picks early on in the first round as well. So, and some names that we've seen, as of recent, Philadelphia, of course, but then Washington, a group that hasn't really been in that spot. They're tucked inside the top 7 or 8. Detroit, is in there as well. St. Louis, interesting there in the top 10. And then what's even more exciting, I think, is the fact that Buffalo and Ottawa, you look at both of those programs, program franchises, I should say, both of those teams were basically high up on this list for the past 4, 5, 6 years. And then all of a sudden, now they're kind of knocking on the door of making an entry to the Stanley Cup playoffs, which I think is exciting. This process and the cycle for both these teams has really turned into a much better process for them. And they're starting to kind of feel that upswing. That Buffalo Sabres team is going to be a dangerous team in a couple of years. So, and for real this time, not just us saying it, and Ottawa isn't far behind. So yeah, it should be exciting. And whoever's going to pick first, Bedard, no question, as good as Adam Fantilli is. There's no doubt that Connor Bedard is he's going first. He's just too good. He's a generational talent. So moving on here to some retirement news. Justin Braun in Philadelphia, 13 seasons, the Minnesota native, 842 National Hockey League games. He is done. Of course, started his career, had a pretty lengthy stint in San Jose is where a lot of people remember him from. So a good career for him. And then Craig Anderson, we just mentioned the Buffalo Sabres. He was pretty serviceable with a 908 as a backup for that team this season. He announced his retirement, 20 years in the National Hockey League. What a great career Craig Anderson had. Of course, the big bounce back a couple of seasons ago too, with all of the personal struggles that he was going through in his life, was just extremely interesting to see him kind of go through those sorts of things. We have a lot of firings or non-re-signings, so to speak, and then we'll get to some signings and additions here. Let's start in the managerial side. The Pittsburgh Penguins, who of course missed the playoffs for the first time since 2006 in Crosby's rookie season, in 16 seasons, I believe. They fired general manager Ron Hextall, who hadn't been there that long, assistant GM Chris Pryor, and president of hockey operations Brian Burke as well. So the Penguins kind of doing a full-scale reshuffle here besides their core. It's going to be an interesting offseason out there in the Steel City. In Calgary, general manager Brad Treliving ends his tenure after 9 seasons. He's 64 years of age. I think this one kind of caught a lot of people off guard. I think a lot of people were expecting him to kind of re-up his tenure, but this was not a firing. This was he stepped away on his own accord. The Flames missing the playoffs by just 2 points this season. So interesting there in Calgary. In Columbus, Brad Larson out after 2 years. That's Brad Larson, not Brett Larson. 62, 86, and 16 for him in his tenure. So obviously the Blue Jackets really struggled again this year. Dallas Eakins not returning as the Anaheim Ducks head coach. 100, 147, and 44. Kind of no surprise there. And it would be unfortunate if they end up getting Bedard, though, because that's a coaching opportunity missed out on. How about this one, by the way? The Ottawa Senators, they will not re-sign Cam Talbot, who was 17, 14, and 2 on the season and 8-9-8 in 36 games played. He's 35 years of age. I think the Wild won the Gustafsson trade. Is that is that safe to say at this point? Interesting from Cam Talbot.
Yeah, to say lightly. We said this before, or at least I've made the mention. Where would this Wild team be had Cam Talbot not gotten pissed off that they re-signed Marc-Andre Fleury?
Yeah, no,
or that he was going to be the starter. I mean, let's think about it. Where this team would be if Cam Talbot and Fleury were the duo. I'm not trying to take anything away from Cam Talbot, but Philip Gustafsson has been lights out. And now Cam Talbot, after wanting out, he goes to Ottawa, thinking he's going to be the number one guy. And now he doesn't want to be in Ottawa. So did he overplay his hand? Did he go from what he thought was going to be greener pastures as a number one goaltender? Maybe. And now he's looking for another team at age 35, which is going to be a tough sell to some clubs next year.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting. I wonder where he ends up. I wonder if he ends up in a place like Columbus or something like that, a team that either needs a serviceable backup or is kind of looking to kind of refresh the goaltending tandem while they wait for somebody young to show up. It's interesting for him. He's kind of a guy that has never had a career that has been, solid. But at the same time, I mean, it hasn't been a bad career, but he just kind of hasn't really latched on anywhere. Minnesota felt like the real first place after the ups and downs he had with the New York Rangers. And then, he's just kind of thrown himself back into the fire again. So kind of interesting for him. In Chicago, by the way, the Hawks will not re-sign Jonathan Toews. Pretty interesting send-off for him in Chicago as well, too. So, that Hawks core, like you mentioned, the third best overall odds in the draft lottery to end up with the first overall pick. They're kind of retooling on the fly / rebuilding at the same time. Kind of
that's not a retool, that's a rebuild.
Yeah. But without Jonathan Toews, I mean, it's unfortunate to say it. His body has kind of failed him a little bit. So I mean, it's not like the piece that they're losing has been that productive in recent years. You'd like to see him kind of find his form again and finish out his career maybe with somebody else. I'm about 40-60 that he continues to play hockey after this season. I really don't know.
I don't know either, but here's what I will tell you. I think the decision is on him. I think there are teams that would take him as a leadership role, as a depth role. And I think we both would agree that after Patrick Kane was traded, that the end of that era with those two was officially over with. So it wasn't as shocking to me when it was announced. I think there was just a shock that, essentially 2006, 2007, those two names were synonymous with Chicago Blackhawks hockey and three-time Stanley Cups, right? So to me, Chicago is signaling, not that they didn't do that beforehand and some really terrible returns on trading Alex DeBrincat, but I'm still not salty about that. They just way underdid that trade 100%. But you kind of got the sense it started there, and now in effect, they kind of finished it in reality. But now it's who's the new face of the franchise, right? They do have a decent chance to get the number 1 overall pick. But at the end of the day, is it going to be the same type of tenure we saw with Taves and Kane? Because mind you, weren't they one and then was it 2 number 1 picks back to back?
Yeah, I mean, they just
Kane and Taves 6 and 7.
Yeah, just the success that they had was unbelievable. But honestly, I'm not complaining that the Hawks aren't that good. We had a long time where Chicago was really good here. Now, it's important for them to become relevant in the next 5 years because the Windy City almost lost their hockey team until the infusion of Kane and Taves. So that's a big deal for viability in the National Hockey League too. So it'll be interesting. Bedard would look good in a Hawks sweater. I mean, let's not,
It'll look good in any sweater, but really good in them. So,
not under sugarcoat that at all. But speaking of someone who's going to stay in the same sweater, though, our second to last topic, some signings here and re-additions. The Minnesota Wild retaining Freddie Gaudreau, 5 years, $10.5 million. That's 2.1 average annual value. Oh my gosh, what a steal of a contract this is. Some people were talking about how this was an overpay. I'm like, are you kidding? A guy that can play center on both ends of the ice, is a shootout specialist, and has become a better skater every year in the National Hockey League, and has probably one of the softest set of mitts in the National Hockey League. As a guy who can slot in on a true deep center position NHL team and be a third line center that's extremely serviceable and bring offensive punch, I don't know how you don't like this in Minnesota. I get the term is slightly long, but I don't know. He's not that old.
Slightly long. That's hilarious. Here's my thing. Here's what the Wild are doing. And Noah Grant, we have talked about, maybe not as extensively as maybe we have, and maybe at one point, maybe after the playoffs, we should talk about it. And I brought this up before, is the discussion around this team with their contracts has always been, how are they going to get past the combined to 2025, right? Yeah. $12.7 million this year, 14.7 the next 2 years. The fact that they're even a contender in the playoffs being hampered by almost $13 million is crazy in itself, right? But less of the conversation has been, what is their plan after that cap hit comes off, right? Because you got to remember too, after $14.7 million, they have a couple of years where essentially $1.6 million, so they get a lot of it back. But here's what they've done. They've secured Spurgeon. They've secured Brodin. Now they've secured both Gaudreau and Matt Boldy. Joel Eriksson-Ek is there. So what they've mentioned is, okay, here's our core. Here's what we're going to build around. We hope to get Kaprizov back too. They're getting their dollars ahead now. Yep. So that's really what this move is. And to your point, this is a steal of a contract for a guy that's really good defensively. Like you said, great set of hands, incredible in the shootout. Yeah, he's not going to be the biggest point producer, but he's that guy that can provide you a lot of different options. He can play center. He can play wing. He's a great skater. And he's a guy that you can trust in multiple situations, right? Penalty kill. Yeah. He can be a guy in the power play if you need him to be. But 5-on-5, he's always been money. So to me, you're securing a player that you really like. And more so, after a couple more years of cap hell, now you're trying to figure out what kind of dollars you got to work with to extend Kirill. And then how are we going to build our team around these core players? Bill Guerin has done an amazing job with this. This is another piece of that puzzle for life after the Suter and Parise contracts. That big cap hits expires after 25.
And a guy that's gotten better each season, and you want to bank on that now, unless, let's say he has, a 40-point season next season for whatever reason, then he's not worth 2.1. Then he's worth 4.1, right. And it's like, you want to kind of get ahead of that while you can and realize that he's found a home here. He's finally found his footing in his game. A true day in and day out NHLer at this point here. You want to make sure that he stays at a price point that, allows him to offer the value he has to this club. So yeah, great move by Bill Guerin. I definitely agree. Columbus Blue Jackets here. Alex Texier rejoins the club next season. Of course, didn't join this year at the recommendation of the NHLPA Substance Abuse and Behavioral Health Program. This sounded like it was a little bit more on the behavioral health, just kind of mental health side of things as opposed to the other piece. But yeah, again, speculation. 23-year-old spent last season in Switzerland, 35 points in 46 games with the ZSC Lions. So wishing him the best of luck. The Jackets sound very excited to have him back. A good young little player there for that squad. And then Danny Briere to remain as the Flyers general manager full time. So he's kind of got his hands full doing some heavy hitting out there in Philly. I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit more as we talk about some offseason plans around the National Hockey League. Finally, injury news here. The Avalanche, Gabriel Landeskog, of course, done for the year. Joe Pavelski in Dallas, he's out indefinitely, but he is skating right now. So he did skate today. So keep an eye on that one if this series does go to 7 games against the Dallas Stars. And then Winnipeg, Josh Morrissey out at least for this series with a lower body injury against Vegas. And then in Carolina, Teuvo Teravainen also out indefinitely after breaking his hand in game number 2. And welcome into the Huskies Warming House podcast, episode 159. Nick Max and Noah Grant here to dive right into it. The bit of college news, of course, that we have to jump into will be the start of the main portion of our show. My guess is we either are going to record on Sunday night or Monday night next week. So whenever that will be, we'll have to see. We originally planned for Monday. It might be Sunday. We'll see. We haven't actually discussed if you can't tell that already. But with that being said, look for a Monday morning or Sunday night or Tuesday morning release somewhere around there in the early portions, really around the transition time into round 2 of the Stanley Cup playoffs is kind of where you want to take a look to see when our next episode for 160 comes out. But let's start college hockey world and by extension, the USHL. Quick little tidbit here. The Fargo Force clinching the regular season title in the USHL, their first ever Anderson Cup. I have a couple of friends that I skate with, of course, in the summer that are on that team. A couple of St. Cloud commits on that team as well, too. And then, of course, head coach, former assistant coach Nick Oliver in his first season at the helm. And I'd say it's going pretty well so far as they get ready for the Clark Cup playoffs. Yeah, Nick, Fargo, what a great season that they've had. What a great success story for Nick Oliver. And in a good way, I hate to say it, he's probably shortening his tenure in Fargo quicker and quicker, considering the success that he's had.
Oh, for sure. And granted, we know, Nick Oliver quite well. In fact, did a couple of recordings of Hockey and Show with St. Cloud with him. Smart guy, just really good communicator with the players too. Knows the ins and outs of the game. And we're seeing that, right? One with the Fargo Force. I would be curious if he gets phone calls as there is this summer. Not sure that he will necessarily get a job per se, but he will be on a lot of people's radars for sure after maybe next season. But it would not shock me if, say, other dominoes fall, which we don't know if they will or not. He, like you said, very short term, probably for Fargo, but he's going to end up being a head coach somewhere.
I hear Bentley has an opening.
Yeah, they do. He's not going there though. So.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
it'll be interesting. A great success for him. The job's not done. You'd love to see them go all the way. That team, very good. A couple of course, St. Cloud commits on that roster, by the way. Of course, Leo Gruba on the back end, and then Werner Miettinen, of course, taking a look at him and what he's going to potentially and probably bring to the table next year. Sounds like he's getting ready to make the jump from what it seems. Before we jump to St. Cloud quickly here, other NCAA player moves of note in the past couple of weeks here. Of course, Matty Nyes did sign his contract with Toronto and the Maple Leafs. Brock Faber, of course, to Minnesota, did pretty good, slightly losing his man, but then diving in front of a puck in game 1. We'll talk about that, of course. Luke Hughes to New Jersey scored his first NHL goal in a nice little wraparound in overtime. Mike Benning to Florida. Mackie Samoskevich and Yaniv Peretz both headed to Carolina. And then Wyatt Kaiser to Chicago. He scored, I believe, in his first game or second game? I can't remember. When he scored, I think it was his first game. And then Eric Portillo in the LA Kings organization in Ontario in the AHL there. So a couple of professional signings in that regard. As far as other player movements in the portal and other things, let's start on the men's side. Colorado College, Connor Mayer is staying at CC, like we mentioned. Henry Wilder coming over, a junior netminder from Boston College, played 3 games last season, had an 8.57 and a 5.48. So I'm guessing he wasn't put into some very favorable situations, but he is an addition for the Colorado College Tigers. Other than that, other teams that have gotten an addition. Brett Chorsky actually ended up at Colgate, and Nate Schweitzer ended up at Lake Superior State. So the Tigers losing everybody that was on their transfer portal list so far, except for Cade Arnholz, who's still waiting for a home there. Of course, Minnesota native, I believe, correct? Cade?
Maybe.
I feel like maybe not. I don't remember. And then Denver, the only addition for them, Owen Ozar is headed to Bowling Green. Tyler Haskins, of course, to Minnesota State. We mentioned that. And Brett Edwards still in the portal. The senior forward had 5 points last season. Miami adding Albin Nielsen from Niagara, had 24 points in 40 games as a senior forward last season. Good little pickup for him. A 2-time transfer, also played at Providence. So he's the only addition for the Miami Redhawks, who, of course, are losing a slew of players that have gone multiple ways. I believe Chase Pletsky headed to Michigan. He's the only new.
Miami has 3 transfer additions: Spencer Cox and Ryan Sullivan also to that list.
Yeah. So Minnesota Luke Bass coming from North Dakota, the sophomore defenseman, had 3 points last season. And then Penn State, Connor McMenamin, the senior forward, 24 points for him, headed to Duluth. That's a nice little pickup for the Bulldogs, who are kind of reeling from the loss of Isaac Howard and Luke Milmock a little bit. So, of course, Howard heading to Michigan State, Milmock with his brother in Niagara. So, actually, the most active team in the NCHC besides St. Cloud as of recent has been Omaha. Down there in Nebraska, adding Jesse Lanzel from Notre Dame, had 15 points as a senior forward last season. And Dominic Vidoli, the junior defenseman coming from Ohio State, had 5 points in 23 games as a junior last season. So kind of trying to alleviate the loss of Davis Pennington on the back end and Cam Berg on the forward side. This has kind of been Omaha's MO. I think Omaha and St. Cloud have been the two teams that have been similar in regard to they look for about, 2 to 3, in this case for Omaha this year, 4 guys because of some of the changes, and kind of just try to restock by committee a little bit with the Mavs here. So I really like the Jesse Lanzel picked up from Notre Dame, by the way, a nice little infusion of offense there and a guy that's going to bring some veteran presence. North Dakota, everything's just been crazy in North Dakota. Of course, we'd mentioned Garrett Pike on the back end coming from Alaska. Then Hunter Johannes from Lindenwood had 29 points in 28 games as the senior forward last season. Ludwig Pearson, we mentioned, from Miami in net. Keaton Pearson, not same spelling, not related at all, defenseman from Michigan, had 11 points in 39 games, kind of trying to restock the back end who had lost every single defenseman. Bennett Smolik coming from Minnesota State, Mankato, and then Cam Berg, like we mentioned, coming over from Omaha. So they lost a lot in the transfer portal too. One of them headed to St. Cloud State. So let's talk about it in just a few moments. We might as well start with Western Michigan here very quick. Sam Colangelo coming from Northeastern. For Western Michigan, that was their only new addition. And then Jack Perbix did find a home at Northern Michigan, was the only change for them. So for St. Cloud, they add 2 players, one coming from Alaska, 31 games played at 5 points for the sophomore defenseman Carl Falk. And then on the forward side, Nick Ports from North Dakota, also a sophomore, 27 games played, 2 goals, 7 assists, 9 points for him. St. Cloud has now pushed themselves into a spot where they have 10 forwards and 6, maybe 7 defensemen right now before their freshman additions here, Nick. Falk joins Dylan Anhorn, Josh Lidkey, Jack Peart, Cooper Wiley, and Mason Reiners for sure on the back end. Andre Treyball right now is still technically a question mark right now. It sounds like he's going to go pro, but we haven't heard anything as of yet. Do you like the additions from Brett Larson? You talk about his coaching staff. He's a guy that's very selective about what he's looking for in the transfer portal. We've seen guys before come in that had point values that maybe didn't pop out and jump off the page. What do you think both these guys bring?
Just from reading a little bit about their stats, right, and then going into maybe some game logs, one thing that I noticed from Falk is, more of a defensive defenseman, bigger kid. So definitely a guy that can be more of that shutdown presence like a Brendan Bushy was. He's got some size too. He's not like the biggest kid, but he's got a little bit of size. That's how I see it, being that stay at home, just make sure everything's in front of him kind of kid. And then Nick Ports, to me, this is an interesting pickup because there's no question that St. Cloud needs center depth. I'm not sure if Nick played center at North Dakota, or was he mostly in the wing? I think he was in the wing, wasn't he?
I can't really remember off the top of my head. Just, the interesting piece, of course, a lot of family ties to St. Cloud too. So a destination that definitely, quite obviously, was high on his list.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, right, with Brett Larson and his coaching staff, I think for Nick Ports, one of the things that, if I remember watching his game, it reminded me a lot of the player that I think St. Cloud wanted out of, why can't I think of his name? Oh,
who do you play for?
Bad. No, essentially he's a current roster player. I'm gonna give me a second here. I'm gonna find him, but I think this is so bad. I know. Kill me now.
I'm just waiting for another descriptor. Honestly, what's
I'm pulling up the roster right now.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Ryan Rousborough. That's who I was thinking of.
Oh, there you go.
I think Nick Ports is what they wanted Ryan Rousborough to be. That's how I see it. I could be completely wrong. Everybody knows my hockey takes are full of crap, so who the heck knows? So
people also don't realize how easy it is to forget names of players who play on the teams that you cover. Like, I know that sounds like Nick is kind of like slightly embarrassed about that right now. Like, honestly, it happens every week. It happens every week where you can't remember who a guy is for whatever reason. We see a lot of hockey and a lot of players, and the transfer portal does not make anything easier. So it's interesting. Caleb Thiessen is probably the other defenseman that comes in for sure, along with Jack Ryman on the forward side, Werner Miettinen on the forward sade, and maybe somebody else. Leo Gruba potentially on the back end are a couple of guys that might make the jump. But we did have a fan question here, Nick. Who would you pair with Josh Lidke next season? Of course, Anhor played with Lidke before getting hurt. Peart played with Lidke, of course, after Anhorn got hurt. I think in my mind, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I look at this lineup. Again, we said Anhorn, Lidke, Peart, Wiley, Reiners, Falk, and Treyball. I know you want to spread the wealth a little bit, but I mean, Anhorn and Lidke have been far and away your two best defensemen over the course of last season. I mean, they're your top pair. They just are. Like, for me, I don't know that spreading the wealth is that effective in this case. I think at least to start the season, I think you're just going to see them both together because it was a very effective defensive pairing.
It was, and you can spread the wealth if, say, you're a bottom four. Is interchangeable, which I'm not sure with the new blood. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, right? I would put Peart and Falk together a little bit. And here's why I say that. Towards the end of the season, and especially in the NCHC Frozen Face-Off, and a little bit into the NCAA playoffs, we saw a little bit of that offensive prowess that Jack Peart has shown in a little bit of pieces. But we saw a little bit more of it. And I think if you put Jack Peart with somebody that is more of that stay back guy, gives you the green light to be, maybe in his head, to be a little bit more offensively minded, I think you can unlock a lot more out of his game that would be comparable to, say, a guy like, I don't know, Nick Perbix. I think there's more of a comparable than people realize. I think the skill set's there. I think there's maybe just something to say, because I think Jack Peart has such a high hockey IQ. Sometimes you overthink it a little bit, and sometimes you get a little hesitant to maybe go out and be, I don't know when you say aggressive or just, kind of take control of the play.
You know what's weird? And of course, Peart, of course, is a Minnesota Wild, draft pick. He kind of reminds me a little bit, if you put like Kalen Addison and Jonas Brodin together a little bit in that sense, like you mentioned. Kalen Addison has some of the similar issues where he's got a lot of tools in his offensive toolbox, needs to work a little bit on his decision making, and also kind of just needs to be a little bit more confident in his game and be a little bit more deliberate in the plays that he makes and shore up a little bit of the defensive side. I don't know that comparable is too far away. At first, I was going to go Matt Dumba because that's what everybody does, but Matt Dumba's game is just different from what Jack Peart brings to the table. It's interesting, like you mentioned, he needs somebody that's riding shotgun with him that's able to kind of, I don't want to say clean up his mistakes, but be the safety valve and give him the freedom to feel like he could step up. You look in previous years, Nick Perbix had guys that were riding shotgun next to him that were comfortable in that role. That was able, in fact, you're going to have to help me out in this one. I can see the player that he was riding shotgun with
Was that Jack Ashawn?
Well, later in his career, he was a transfer. He's a transfer on the back end. And why can't I think of his name? I'm not really sure right now. Played 2 seasons here. It's gonna drive it. Number 2, number 3.
Seamus Donahue.
There you go. Thank you. Yeah. So there's a guy that's a prime example of one that I couldn't remember his name, but number 2, a guy that kind of gave Nick Perbix the freedom to make plays like that. Similar situation, I think, would be warranted. The question is how well I think will Falk's game assimilate to the NCAA level. I think is really what our question is he the guy that's going to step into that top 4 role, or is it one of these young guys that's going to take a jump next season and kind of be our guy? Or in a weird roundabout way, does Andre Treyball somehow end up returning to the Huskies? Not really sure, but yeah, it'll be interesting. Is there anything else you wanted to add on St. Cloud? No? Okay. Well, let's move over to the Minnesota Wild here. We are NHL from here on out. So starting off with game number 1, this series has had kind of an interesting ride between the Dallas Stars and the Minnesota Wild. Nick and I were talking about it pre-show. Really, this series has been about even as it gets in a weird way, because each team has won a game that they probably deserve to lose, and they've each lost a game by a comfortable margin in which they got outplayed heavily. So for Minnesota, the game that they won that they probably shouldn't have was game 1. They had a decent start to this hockey game, but the finish was all Dallas. I mean, the Stars were all over them at the end of period number 3 in both the overtimes, but it was Ryan Hartman with a double overtime winner off of a nice forecheck and turnover for the victory. Minnesota, you have 92 combined hits in this hockey game, which is just absolutely absurd. I mean, the physicality was crazy. Scoring got started with Kirill Kaprizov with less than a minute left in the first period. Roope Hintz and Jason Robertson both in the power play answer in the early stages of period number 2 before Sam Steele on the breakaway had us tied until Ryan Hartman scored at 12:20 of the second overtime. Yeah, Nick, this is where we got our first taste of, 1, how physical this series was going to be, and number 2, how much of a goaltending battle this is going to be. One of the best hockey games that we've seen in recent memory, and also the longest game in franchise history in the playoffs for the Minnesota Wild.
It was, and, I think you described it well for the most part. I'm not going to figure on it too much. So we're the better team the first half. Dallas pushed back, and then you just survive in overtime. Both teams traded some chances, some odd man rushes, but talk about sometimes you get a bounce. They get a clear up the wall that I think caught a skate essentially, and it goes right to Hartman. He was trailing the play essentially, and he holds onto that puck for that extra second while Ottinger went down in his butterfly. He's got a wide open right side of the net. He's able to pot it, and the Wild steal game 1. It's about all you can say.
Yeah, shots 53-48 in favor of Dallas. The Wild were all over them in the first 2 periods in terms of shots on goal, like we mentioned. You look at the save percentages, though. I mean, 45 of 48 for Jake Ottinger, who stopped 38 of 40 at even strength and 7 of 8 on the power play. On the other side, Philip Gustafsson, a perfect 42 for 42 at even strength, stopping 6 of 8 on the power play. And then on the other side, 3-on-3 shorthanded on the other side of that piece, too. So, yeah, like you mentioned, the special teams continuing to play a factor in this series. Get ready for that theme. If the Wild can figure out their special teams, they're going to be just fine. I'm going to throw that out there right now. Game number 2, the Wild outshot 31-26 in this hockey game, 1 for 5 on the man advantage, giving up 3 on 6 opportunities on the power play on the other side for the Stars, who end up winning this one 7-3. It was 2-1 after the first period. Oscar Sundqvist gets one back for the Wild. Marcus Johansson and Freddie Gaudreau score in period number 2 to make it 4-3 before the Stars ultimately lead 6-3 out of the second intermission, and Roope Hintz adds another on the power play to cap this one off at 7-3. This, of course, was, I don't know if this was a head scratcher. In my mind, it kind of was. I'm a very big, this is a situation unlike last year where you ride the hot hand until the hot hand shows you it has nothing left. Last year's situation was, I think, a bit different because you didn't have a definitive 1A guy versus, 1B. But Fleury gets a chance, stopping 24 of 31. Did not get a lot of help in front of him. And unfortunate for him in that regard. Of course, Jake Ottinger stopping 23 of 26 in the win for the Dallas Stars. This one kind of got out of hand early and was a little bit ugly. We also kind of failed to mention, too, and maybe we'll circle back to it. We wondered if the animosity from game 1 was going to carry back into game number 2. I think the energy kind of found itself a little bit more with the success that Dallas had on the ice, as opposed to, the actual things about game one, which I think we'll probably circle back and at least talk about that hit. But yeah, this was fair to say Minnesota had a sniff, but really a no-show for most of the night. Is that fair to?
For most of the night, I wouldn't characterize as a total no-show. I do want to respond to the Fleury thing because to me, it's not that much of a head scratcher. I know, hot take. I know, I almost made you spit out your drink. So
I don't know if it was a hot take. I just
well, it is kind of hot because on one side, you're absolutely right. Philip Gustafsson has been the better goaltender throughout the entire season. He's given you no reason to not let him keep the net, right? Yeah. On the other side of the coin, and this kind of goes back to the Cam Talbot off ice sort of things, right? Is you sort of signed Marc-Andre Fleury to be a playoff goaltender, right? And there's no question he wants to be in the net. So you kind of wonder, with a game going to double overtime, that tensions, especially after the Matt Dumba hit, were up. You had a feeling that Dallas was going to push. Was this not only one, you just doing your rotation that you normally did, sort of, in the regular season, also taking the temperature of the so-called room and expecting to get kind of throttled a little bit, and you don't want to rattle your number one goaltender's confidence. And so you put Marc-Andre Fleury out to the Wolves. I think both maybe are true. Hard to say for sure. But I'm not nearly as upset by, because I don't put all the blame on Fleury. Now, here's where I will give Fleury a little bit of grief, because I didn't think he would tell you the same thing. When the Wild scored 2 goals in 11 seconds to bring them within 1, that they had all the momentum. That goal that made it 5-3, that 5-hole goal, you can tell that Marc-Andre Fleury knew that was a back-breaking goal. And then the 6th goal, again, really not executing a poke check. He waited too long. He didn't really go out for it totally. It's an easy read for Roope Hintz. That was his second of the game. At that point, you're throwing darts at the wall, hoping to hit a balloon, right, kind of thing. So that, to me, is where you can put a little blame on Fleury. But beyond that, at the end of the day, too many grade A chances for the Stars in that game, and they manhandled the Wild and took advantage of their chances.
Yeah, I mean, I just go back to the fact, Ottinger started game 2 just fine. It wasn't a question of rest, I don't think, even as deep as that game went into. I think, with Fleury, though, yes, he's a playoff goalie, but at the same time, I hate to say it, as much as I love the guy, if you're sacrificing Marc-Andre Fleury to hang on to Philip Gustafsson and wait for, a guy like Jesper Wallstedt to make the jump, or you're trying to fill that void, I'm okay with that, because at the end of the day, Marc-Andre Fleury has got 1, 2, maybe 3 seasons left in him. For Minnesota, you've got to be thinking about the next step, and Gustafsson played well enough to earn the start. But you know what? From game 3 onward, he's earned it, and it's kind of a moot point at this point. But it was interesting at the time, I think, as we looked around. Before we jump to games 3 and game 4, why don't we talk about that hit? Of course, Pavelski getting absolutely leveled. Absolutely steamrolled by Matt Dumba, hitting his head on the ice and probably in concussion protocol. Just not exactly the best result of the hit, just kind of an unfortunate result. The conversation first started, is this hit dirty? Is it clean? I don't think it was a malicious hit by any means. Was it on the cusp of being late, like a lot of people have said? Yeah, you're getting close to the end of that window, but I think in the playoffs, I think you see a lot of guys finishing their hits,
still in the legal window.
Yeah, a quarter of a second later than they normally do. I think just the fact that Pavelski didn't see him coming, and then you get the end result, and of course the Wild are on the road against Dallas. Just kind of an unfortunate result. Pavelski, unfortunately, ends up suffering another head injury, and ironically enough, being the victim in a sense of the own rule that he ended up creating with the Vegas San Jose situation a couple of years ago. Unfortunate to see a guy like that get hurt, but I think, are we both in agreement that this play was
a clean hit,
a shade late, but totally fine? Interference at best,
not technically late. To the viewing eyes, it's a shade late, but to the NHL standards, it's perfectly within the allowable window. Yeah. And I think, to your point, what I want to focus on is, principal point of contact, right? Shoulder to shoulder. I think we both would agree that the injury occurs when his head hits the ice. Apparently, his head hits the ice in the playoffs, and apparently just gets bad luck, right?
Yeah.
But to your point, I want to focus on the initial call on the ice, which was initially a 5-minute major, right? So the referees call it. They go to review, and then there ends up being a 2-minute minor for roughing, which to me isn't the hit. That was the after.
Right.
Right. So the NHL, even after looking at it with multiple angles, they said this isn't even a penalty.
Yeah.
Right. And for Dallas Stars fans who won't shut up about it, who literally within 8 hours were asking about where is the Department of Player Safety and this and that. And like, you do realize that Toronto, those same offices are also helping in these reviews, right? No question the Department of Player Safety is looking at that almost in real time. You would have seen probably an early morning announcement if it was going there, but based on how it was called, how it was essentially totally taken off the board, nothing was going to happen there.
Yeah, no, I agree. Actually, the most egregious play of the night, and this is not just coming from a Minnesota Wild perspective, and not even the first one, the second cross-check against Kirill by Suter in front of the net, right in the midsection, right in between where you have padding. Any player who has played the game watched that and went, "Oh my gosh, that." You could feel that one. That's an uncomfortable cross-check. Ryan Suter, I mean, you gotta give him credit. He's a guy that really knows how to play right underneath that edge or play right over the edge, but not have those things get detected. I mean, that's why he's been effective in the league for so long. And yes, he has been effective in the league for a long time. Don't make the mistake of thinking a guy has a career that long without, having sizable contribution in something like that. You look at the time where he got hit from behind from Ryan Reeves into the goalpost a couple of playoff series ago by Ryan Reeves, and the context makes a lot more sense, though, I'll tell you that much. Yeah, that was bad. Those are things that I think, especially as former players, you watch that, and those are the frustrating pieces because, the Pavelski hit, you can talk about it. Is it late? Is it not? Was it slightly high? Was it not? Was it warranted? Was it not? Anyone who watches the game objectively, whether you're a Stars fan or not, can look at that cross-check from Suter and say, yeah, that's brutal. That has no place in the game of hockey. It doesn't have any bearing on a net mouth scramble or anything like that. That was an ugly one, I kind of thought. Are you a little bit surprised? I know he's not a fighter and he avoids these type of things. Are you surprised that Suter still hasn't ended up in a melee of some sort just by happenstance? Or do you kind of feel
not at
like,
all.
Yeah.
No, because Ryan Suter avoids those types of things. Again, to your point, you don't, as a defenseman, and he's a decent sized defenseman too, right?
Yeah.
He's a guy that knows how to get under the skin and somehow avoid all the chaos. There's actually a skill on that. I hate to say that, but there actually is. The game within the game, right? This is the stuff that we talk about, right? And part of that is a couple of cross checks. There was one of the zone entry by Kirill, got him to right in the side, in between the padding, right? And then in front of the net. So those are things that you talk about excessive, whether it's stick infractions, if you want to call it, right? That aren't called. These are the things that playoff hockey is. And whether you agree with it or not, these are the things that when players have been wrong long enough for like Suter has, he knows how to, like you said, be at that line where could it easily have been called? Yeah. This is the standard in playoffs, though, is that these things are typically not called. And the one concern that I had, and game one, game two, is if Ryan Reeves does respond in the way that he does, right? First of all, then you're playing it into Suter's hands.
Yeah.
Right. You're playing into, okay, we're not going to focus on our forecheck, getting pucks to the net, cycling, all that good jazz. Now I'm just going to try to take somebody's head off, per se. Right. I'm not advocating for that. So because we're in 2023,
we saw how that worked for another guy in game 4.
Right.
So
at the end of the day, I think the Wild have handled it pretty well as far as I think the temperature has cooled a little bit. Yeah. Now, we'll obviously preview game 5, but the temperature just naturally, because the series now is a best of 3, will turn up. But I think both squads, after such a hard hitting first 4, are going to want to probably try to keep it a little bit more skill based and physical based.
You realize the extracurriculars don't get you anywhere, in what is now a best of 3 series here. And I think the one thing that I really didn't like is a lot of people in social media were talking about, 97, Kirill needs to get used to it. He needs to get used to that kind of punishment. I mean, he was playing through everything. It's like, just because you're used to the punishment and physicality of playoffs doesn't mean that a cross check isn't over the line and it's not a painful thing to go through. I mean, it's just like I said, you can tell people who just have not been in that environment before. Yes, the temperature is heightened, but at the same time, it's like an illegal play is an illegal play, unlike the Joe Pavelski piece. But yeah, Ryan Suter has avoided Ryan Reeves, as much as he has Bill Guerin's phone call about him getting bought out. With that being said, let's move on to games 3 and 4 here. Game 3, an exceptional performance from the Minnesota Wild here. I mean, one of the most complete efforts they've had since the calendar year flipped over, of course. Shots in this one ended up being 25-24 Minnesota, but it felt like a lot more than that. Of course, the Wild start the scoring with Matt Zuccarello with 4 minutes left in period number 1. And then Marcus Johansson.
Dirty.
What a move. Puts the Wild up 2-0. Luke Glendening gets one back moments later in the second period, and Marcus Foligno off of a redirect on the power play.
Tip.
Oh, beautiful. Makes it 3-1. I was really worried they weren't going to call that one a good goal because it was no goal in the ice, but I was, you're looking at that and you're saying that's a good goal. Integrity of the game. You're right at the crossbar line. There's no way you can definitively say, like, it wasn't egregious where you would say, oh yeah, he was 1.5 feet above the crossbar. I mean, it was right there. And it's like, man, it's kind of like offside review. Are you really able to differentiate from those things? Matt Zuccarello adds one on a nice little line rush with 5 minutes left in that hockey game. And then Ryan Hartman, the empty netter, all the way down the ice to seal the deal. 5-1 Minnesota is the final score. Like we mentioned, the Wild did not give up a power play goal, only 2 shorthanded opportunities for them. They did score 1 for 4 on the power play. Gustafsson back in the net, stopping 23 of 24. Jake Ottinger stopping 20 of 24, did not get much help in front of him, similar to game 2 from Minnesota on the other side of things. I don't really know if there's much to dissect with this one. I mean, this was
not really
a great performance from Minnesota. I mean, hands down the return of John Klingberg as well, too. How about the fact we didn't talk about this in game 1, and of course the game-saving dive from Brock Faber, but I mean, he has been a guy that
it's been solid. Not
only has been serviceable, but has been like, he looks like an NHLer. And like, I don't say that to be obvious. I say that because there are guys like let's throw John Merrill, who I thought actually had a pretty decent game 1, but like overall is a guy that looks like a 7th defenseman. He looks like a guy that is in the lineup because of circumstance. Brock Faber didn't carry himself that way. He looks like a guy that, yes, he's a 3rd pairing D-man, but he looks like the 5th defenseman or maybe the 6th defenseman who belongs in that lineup. And he's assimilated himself well. He's secretly strong in a sense where even when he gets knocked off of pucks, he's got great recovery. He puts himself in really good positions with his body. Great to come off of a national championship, contending run and jump into that playoff atmosphere. The moment hasn't seemed like it's been too big for him. I've been extremely impressed with the former Minnesota Golden Gopher defenseman.
Yeah, and I think the other part that I've been impressed with is his battle intensity. He's winning wall battles, and just when you think that, he gets double teamed. I remember at game 3, he was double teamed in the corner. I believe that was second period. And he maybe initially lost it, was kind of getting pushed around, but then strong on his skates, right? He's able to kind of pin the puck back up along the wall, create a 50-50 puck, get help, and then was able to lead a breakout the other way. So he probably still needs to bulk up a little bit, but as far as being in the right spot, reading the play correctly, making the right pass, using his feet, his angles are great. But more importantly, he's winning those wall battles, and then he's taking the puck and making the next best decision with the puck. His puck management's been really good. So impressive for a guy that is only 6 career games of his National Hockey League career. And like you said, looks comfortable, does not look like he's 6 games in. He looks very mature. Yeah. He looks poised, and it's going to be fun to watch his game grow. Hopefully it's a lot more this season, but if the Wild, if you're going to lose Fiala, if this is the return you got, holy cow, did the Wild ever get a great defenseman that you are going to be able to have on your roster for years to come. Yeah. And Brock Faber has certainly not disappointed.
For a trade that you weren't going to win, It makes the loss a lot more palatable. Let's just put it that way. It's exactly where I was going to go with that too. Before we jump over to game 4, you were actually in attendance for game number 3, by the way. I'm going to assume the atmosphere was pretty good. From what Seth Topol tells us too, that apparently the laser light show is A++++, I guess. Is that, or were you too many beers deep to remember the laser light show?
No. That's a separate rant on the pregame festivities, because I actually know the production company that does all that work. So, and I can't, I'll just do a small rant. The pregame needs an overload. It does. I hate to say it, it does. And the reason why I say that is it's a light and music show, but I just didn't feel like it was getting me.
You didn't feel like it was an emotional experience. Yeah,
not at all. Not at all. It just. Did you see? Okay, were you at home for game 4? Yes. Did
you see the pre-pack they put together from game 3?
Yeah.
That was exceptional. I think that's kind of where you're going with that is.
Right. And because I rant and then you cut me off all the time, I'm going to keep it short this time. They don't tell a story. They just don't. It's just music and lights. It looks cool, but it's not getting me in the mood for a game. There's a small little pre-pack on screen with highlights, but it's not telling me a story of how they got here, what tonight is, and what to look forward to. Am I spoiled because I've been to a couple of Vegas Golden Knights games and they have sort of rewritten the book on pre-games? Maybe. But every single game that they do, whether it's regular season or playoffs, they tell a story of that game. And no matter what the circumstances are, whether it's what you call a meaningless regular season game or maybe going game 7 to a playoff game, they do set the tone real with a good storyline. And to me, the Wild and the pre-pack are missing that element. And if it's just, to me, it's just not tied together.
So you're saying you're missing the Pavelski hit, you're missing the Kaprizov cross check, you're missing the chaos you
could even go back to 1992 and say this franchise left Minnesota, put in more of that, and now we're back second time. This is our state. Screw them. Throw in that hit. Throw in the checks. Throw in the crush of the Kaprizov. Right,
and the best bet
first. You can tie all that together very easily. Here's the problem with this, and this goes to some inside knowledge. So the programming to that laser light show, plus with the on ice projection, takes days. Right. So the problem is that to me, skip the lasers. Sure, they're cool, but to me, they don't do much for me. I'd rather have a more tied together storyline with better light show, minus the lasers.
I want to hear more about the best. I want to hear more about the best damn fans in the league. How about that intro, by the way?
So I will tell you this: I have both as a fan and as a journalist covering that team going all the way back to 2007. Obviously, I don't have maybe the number of games some others that do, right? Talking Dan Myers, Michael Russo, right? But I've been in the building for regular season and playoff games where the anticipation was there, the energy was there. That crowd atmosphere is number one. It wasn't even close. Every time the puck came close around zero, it was loud enough boos you couldn't hear. They were chants. It felt like the crowd was engaged 120%. The scream when Joel Eriksson was announced as a starter, I mean, seriously, it would have blown off the roof of the Metrodome. And mind you, that was the loudest stadium experience I've had growing up. Say what you want about it, but that was part of the dome. It was the sound, right? That eclipsed that, and that was not something I'd ever thought I would ever experience again. Was that sound level that you got the Metrodome, because it just echoed, it reverberated. That building, I swear, I don't know how the roof didn't get blown off. It was unbelievable.
So what you're saying is, if you can find a ticket for Game 6, you should probably go. I'm guessing the atmosphere is going to be pretty incredible. Game 4, Minnesota probably should have had this one. It wasn't for lack of opportunity. Jake Ottinger, what a save at the end of that hockey game, by the way. 34-24 were the shots for Minnesota in this one. Wild go 1 for 4 on the power play. Again, special teams on the offensive side has clicked exactly what you like in the playoffs. They give up 2 on 3 opportunities on the power play side. Of course, we can talk about the officiating all day. I mean, Marcus Foligno kind of over the line a little bit, depending on what you want to, when you bring that level of tenacity where you ride that line, but you're jawing at the other team, you're jawing at officials a little bit, at some point the dam is about to break. I think for Minnesota, the fortunate piece is it was game 4, not game 7, right? In that regard, you still have time to kind of level out the playing field and kind of put yourself back in focus a little bit here. Minnesota, like I said, probably deserved this one. They didn't get it. Tyler Seguin adds one on the power play in the second period with 5 minutes left. Evgeny Dadonov, kind of a tough little wrist shot through a screen. 3 minutes into period number 3, through a couple of bodies. Dallas leads 2-0. John Klingberg gets one back from the point. Just 2.5 minutes later, Tyler Seguin, again, his second of the night, a nice little zone entry on a power play that otherwise had absolutely nothing going on, actually, in this one from Jamie Benn and Rupe Hintz. And then Freddie Gaudreau adds one with the netminder pulled on the doorstep to make it a 1-goal hockey game with 1.5 minutes left. But that would be it for the Minnesota Wild, who lose this one 3-2. Jake Ottinger was exceptional. His best game of the series since game 1. 29 of 30 stops for him. And then Gustafsson, stopping a total of 21 on 24 shots. I mean, it has been great again at even strength. Just needs a little bit of help on the defensive side on the kill. Minnesota, this was tough. I mean, is it fair for us to say they probably should have had this one, but kind of got a taste of their own medicine from game 1, so to speak?
A little bit, but it's not the same, right? Because I felt like Minnesota was the team that was better in the second half. I felt like they were generating more. You just ran into a goaltender that was willing to get this series tied, right? And you talk about that save of Johansson with 8-7 seconds left. To stretch out, if Johansson maybe even elevates that puck another 2-3 inches, that's in the back of the net. But still, he pushed hard right to left. He was over there. That's the thing. He was covering a lot of net. That's a hell of a save.
He anticipates the play so well.
And let's not forget, too, that puck was, there's traffic in front of him. So to track the puck going across the seam there, too, is, we forget that sometimes, right? Sometimes just even know the puck is going across from you, east-west. Sometimes you can be lost in the fold with that, was how much traffic is in front of you, right? So the fact that he anticipated it, got over there, strong push, he didn't do what, maybe some old goaltenders do, would do the double stack or, try to do some kind of lazy physical maneuver and try to get a stick on it. He was poised, he was square, chest was up, he had a lot of body there and caught it with the glove. And man, if that puck goes in overtime, you never know. But you could almost call this a missed opportunity, Noah, right? Because the Minnesota Wild, in 4 franchise opportunities up 2-1 in the series, now have never been able to get it to 3-1. And you talk about going back to Marcus Foligno, the only comment I'll make is, you don't, when you have that opportunity, you want to take advantage of it, right? Especially when you are the road team and you really want to put the pressure on the better seed to take care of business on home ice. But at the end of the day, a couple of little mistakes, a couple of bounces, honestly, too, that they got. That first goal, again, that was a crazy pinball. Just nothing you can do really about that. But now you're going to have to go on the road, a place where you have picked up a win. You're going to have to try to repeat a performance. I would argue of games 3 and 4. Again, you fully deserve game 3. Probably deserve game 4. Didn't get a couple of bounces. Dallas took advantage of the limited opportunities that they had. But now you don't get last change. You're going to be in a ruckus environment. You're going to have to be able to be focused and have a full 60-minute effort because Dallas does not. They want to go back to St. Paul and they want to have a chance to win the series. How about that, huh?
What it comes down to, Minnesota has to win at least 1, if not more, on the road. I mean, really, that's what the task at hand is. You talk about Jake Ottinger, by the way, growing up 40 minutes away from the Xcel Energy Center. Pretty crazy how full circle things are headed. So game 5, of course, coming up on Tuesday, the day that this episode will release. Game 6 on Thursday at the Xcel. Game 7, if needed, on Saturday. We'll be back in Dallas. Minnesota has a chance here. I mean, this is a full-blown series. And like you mentioned, I don't remember if you mentioned it during the show or pre-show, but yeah, teams like you said that, they win game 5 and win it, almost, 3/4 of the time, that's a big deal. So Minnesota, the task at hand, they're capable. This team has the goaltending, and enough of the offensive firepower and secondary scoring, which is pivotal in Stanley Cup playoff time, to be able to make some noise here and win game 5 and come back to St. Paul for game 6. We're going to know by the next time that we have a show here what the fate of the Minnesota Wild is going to be. This Minnesota Wild team, contrary to a lot of people's belief, did not roll over and die, but they have to have a strong push. If you lose in 6 games or you lose in 7 games and they're all 1-goal contests and it comes down to a crazy bounce or it comes down to double overtime again, it's palatable because you're giving yourself a chance. You're giving yourself an opportunity, right? But you have to earn that opportunity if you're Minnesota. Regardless of the result, the chips are going to fall where they're going to fall. I think a great example of this, besides the fact that game 7 in this series was a little bit meh, all things considered, the first 6 games of the series against Vegas a couple of seasons ago is a prime example of a team that earned the first 6 games of that series and gave themselves a chance for game number 7. Now for Minnesota, they've got to find a way to get over the hump. There is nothing that would be warranted more for Minnesota sports, Minnesota franchises, this Minnesota Wild group, if they can get to the second round. Be whatever the result of that may be, for this group on this payroll to be able to get to that point against all the naysayers, against all the doubters, against the moments in January and February where we were talking what position in the draft lottery this team was going to be. The opportunity is there. If you're Minnesota, you've got to find a way to capitalize. You've got to find a way to get the job done. We look ahead to game number 5. Nick, both of us had the Minnesota Wild winning this in 6 games in this series. Still a possibility. What's it going to take in game number 5 and ultimately game number 6 or game number 7 for Minnesota to get the job done here?
Ultimately, you got to take advantage of your opportunities. I think the Wild have generated a lot of chances, even strength. The other thing is they got to really fix the PK.
Yes,
they really do. The PK has been abysmal. It's what, at 50%, because they're at 7 for 16 in the series. Dallas is on the power play. So whether that's staying out of the box, which again, a highly contested game 5 is not likely. You have to be better on the PK. This is where you really miss a guy like Mason Shaw, right?
And Eriksson Ek.
Right. This is where those two really make their mark. Eriksson Ek still officially questionable for game 5. It would shock me if he skates at all for the rest of the playoffs, if you want my honest opinion. But that's what it comes down to. I think they've been the better team offensively in terms of creating better chances. They need to get a few past. Kaprizov needs to get a few more behind. He needs to feel a little bit more confident. He put the team in his back last playoff round. Be nice to see him break through. I think that would be huge for confidence, especially for him. And again, special teams, man. Power play has been okay, hasn't been great, but to me, the real concern is the PK.
I was going to say the power play has been exceptional to me. They went 1 for 4 in almost every game, which is exactly serviceable for the playoffs. If they figure out the PK, the Wild are going to be just fine. 5-on-5, they've been the better team, which is 100%. Not something that this Wild team has been able to say through the majority of the season until maybe the last 2 months. A great turnaround here. The Wild, they have a chance. And I think just looking at the Colorado-Seattle series, I think whoever comes out of this one has a pretty good chance to go to the conference finals, regardless of the fact that the Avs finished in first place in the Central. They're a scary team, and Seattle is a great defensive group, but I don't know. I think this is going to be exciting. If you're a Wild fan, must watch hockey, must watch TV, must watch attending if you're able to get a ticket to either or all 3 of these games, depending on how the series shakes out. I'm sticking with Nick here. I'm still saying Minnesota Wild in 6. They've got the capability. They've got to find a way in game 5 on Tuesday night. Should be a good one. We're going to head on to the extra ice session here. We're going to talk very briefly about the rest of the NHL playoffs in the first round. And welcome into the Extra Ice session. Noah Grant alongside Nick Maxon for episode 159. We're going to just take a look around the rest of the Stanley Cup playoff bracket here. We just recapped the Minnesota Wild Dallas Stars series, which is tied at 2 at the time of recording. So if you missed that, definitely go check it out. We'll know the answer to all these series by the next time that we have a show, pretty much. As far as the other series that is in that part of the bracket, let's start Colorado and Seattle, who are currently playing tonight. It's 2-1 at the time of recording, just getting underway here. Yeah, Seattle almost had Colorado down 2-0 besides the comeback from the Avs in game number 2. I'd say Seattle probably really needs this one tonight to kind of give themselves a chance. So by the time the show comes out, the lines may definitely change here. But yeah, are you surprised at how well Seattle has played otherwise? And do you feel like Colorado still has a relatively okay path to get through Seattle? Or do you see this one moving through? You think this one's going to end pretty quickly?
I do. Nathan McKinnon woke up and he was like, I'm not letting this happen. You can tell.
Averaging 6 shots per game. Unreal.
Yeah. And a lot of those finding the back in the net too. What else was going to hurt Colorado a little bit though was Val Nichushkin taking a lead from the team. So that's obviously we wish Val the best, but he was a difference maker for Colorado last playoff season. Hasn't maybe had the notoriety so far, but we're only 3 games in. You kind of wonder if that maybe is an X factor, but I still feel like with Nate McKinnon and Mikko Rantanen to say that, and Cale Makar, Devon Taves, I still feel like they're the better team, and I still feel like they'll take care of business against Seattle.
Yeah, well, it's been interesting. One of the things that I look at for this round, and the title of the graphic, of course, and the YouTube things is round 1 of the NHL playoffs is close. And now what I mean by that is we're going to definitely get some of these series that end up 3-1 by the end of tonight. And of course, the Carolina series is already, and Boston is already in that spot. But what I want to kind of go through is a lot of these other series too, they haven't been 3-1 in the conventional ways that we've seen. It hasn't been where a team has jumped out to a 3-0 lead and then all of a sudden one team just kind of whimpers back a little bit and then it ends in 5 or 6 games. They've been closely contested series through the first 3 or 4 games of the series. And I think that's a testament to the parity of the National Hockey League. We're starting to see it a little bit more. Now, you can say what you want about the playoff format. You can say what you want about the first round matchups being divisional matchups and why you should save that for after the first round. And I'm totally with you on that. But this Minnesota-Dallas series, for example, has been an absolute war. It's been good hockey regardless. So I think that has definitely hit regardless of if it's because of the divisional matchup and the familiarity with teams, or if it's just because of the parity of the National Hockey League. I'm not sure. It's probably a combination of both. But nonetheless, the first round series have been pretty decent so far. Vegas leading Winnipeg 2-1 at the time of recording right now. This Winnipeg team is putting up more of a fight than I think I anticipated here. Vegas has not had exactly an easy run here. Both these series in, let's just say it, the Pacific plus Winnipeg, have offered a lot of chaos in that side of the bracket here. This Vegas series, I don't know if this one gets solved before 7 games anymore, Nick. I'm not really sure. Connor Hellebuck has risen to the occasion.
This team, yeah. He's been known to do that in the past. Also, Vegas defensively is a mess, to say it lightly. Jack Eichel, good to see him get a couple playoff tallies. He's waiting a while to sniff playoff hockey, and he's making the most of it. But Vegas, too, they don't seem like they have the depth to carry through, shall I say, round 1, maybe round 2. But more importantly, they just seem to get lost on their coverage a bit sometimes in the defensive zone. And that to me is a bit scary. And I think oftentimes too, when they're trying to carry the puck into the offensive zone, trying to carry it, Winnipeg stepping up, and Vegas, they just don't want to chip and get it. So, got to give Winnipeg a little credit. Now, the one thing that's going to hurt the Jets is no Josh Morrissey. That's huge for their blue line. So it's going to be a war. Connor Hellebuck has risen to the occasion, like you said, but he's going to need help. Kyle O'Connor has looked really good. Blake Wheeler's actually looked pretty good in this series too. Yeah. But they're going to need all of them and more to step up and get it done, because Vegas, as much as they're flawed in some ways, they still are the better team on paper. And I still feel like, especially with Morrissey being out, that's going to be a huge loss for Winnipeg. That might be too much for them to overcome if nobody else steps up to the plate for the Jets. Yeah, 1-1 after the first period of play in game 4 at the time of recording. How about this? Speaking of your Avs, by the way, we are not even 5 minutes into period number 1. The Kraken are on the power play. They lead 1-0, Nick. Shots 10-1 Seattle, 5 minutes into this hockey game. You think the Kraken are ready to play tonight? No, not at all.
Just throwing that out there. Of course, the Devils beating the Rangers today, and the Leafs and Lightning at the time of recording right now are in overtime. Just getting ready to start. So
they reached a 4-1 third period deficit to tie that game. So
yeah, how about speaking of comebacks? How about the comeback of the Edmonton Oilers the other night to tie this one at 2-2? This series has been fireworks galore. This has been a heavyweight first round matchup here. I have no freaking idea. Again, 7 games. I picked the Oilers. I think you did too, actually. I don't know, man.
I told people, watch out for the Kings. They're sneaky, and they're still without Fiala. But Anze Kopitar, again, the playoff stalwart, has been really, really good. Korpisalo, holy cow, has he looked really impressive with the Kings playing in just a couple starts for them. But I did not. I was not on the same train that Edmonton was going to wipe them with their floor rug. I did not. Yeah. I wasn't on that. I said, hey, this is a 6 or 7. This is going to be close. And right now, it's at least going 6.
Yeah, 3 or 4 games going to overtime. I mean,
So at the end of it, this could easily go 7. And like you said, I have no idea who's going to come out of that series. And at the end of the day, both could easily do it. I guess the X factor, again, Connor McDavid. In a game 7, you probably have your money on him. I think that's where both of us are like, okay, that's where the edge is. I still think that's where it is, but can't count out the Kings, man. They're putting up a hell of a fight.
You look at some of the guys that have been performers for the Kings too, right? Like Adrian Kempe is averaging 4 or 5 shots a game. I mean, it's been impressive. I think that series has probably been the closest series out of any that we've seen. Minnesota, Dallas is probably right up there. And I would say Toronto and Tampa have been the 3 that I think we look at and say, whoa, they've been heavy hitting, very close. On the other side of the bracket, on the bottom half, probably the 2 groupings of least competitive series or the least competitive corner of the bracket so far right now. Carolina leading the Islanders 3-1. I think you and I can agree the Isles are done. They're done. They're just not going to get out of that one.
Same with the Panthers. They're done. And
yeah, we'll jump up there in a second. The Rangers leading the Devils 2-1 though. And then the Devils, of course, win. This hasn't been updated. So, 2-2 this series. Yeah, the Rangers kind of a bit of a scare. The Devils, really, what's been surprising to me, they found a way to now win by committee here and even up this series. But their goaltending has been extremely subpar, including Vanacek losing his starting role here. That is something that I kind of talked about for the Devils. I picked them to go all the way to the final, and I'm like, that's kind of their pivotal pieces. They have enough components that don't wow you, but they're able to keep the train rolling, and their goaltending has been more than serviceable. They're missing that element right now, and I think that's the piece that could really hurt them if they make it into the second round. I mean, this is
Well, when we talked about this matchup, I said the Rangers, right? And I had mentioned that my big concern was just the playoff inexperience with the Devils. They're a young team. Yeah, they're extremely talented. But I get the sense that New Jersey, granted, this series is tied 2-2, right? So at the end of the day, all bets are kind of off at this point. But goaltending has been suspect, to say the lightly. And I think there is a bit of playoff jitters there, especially for Vanacek. I don't think he's been the go-to guy. And it kind of showed. He kind of, I think, folded under the pressure. No good for New Jersey, trying to find other ways to beat the Rangers, which is no easy task. The Rangers are a loaded squad, right?
Yeah.
And could you imagine if the Rangers go down in round 1 after all the moves that they made with Patrick Kane, Vladimir Tarasenko, just to name a couple, right? Holy cow. But hey, it's a best of 3 now, and who knows? Either of them could pull it off. I still think the Rangers have a slight edge, but if New Jersey has found its way, they could easily take this as well. So hard to really get a gauge on this one. We'll know game 5 here coming in a couple of days.
Yeah. Boston leading the Panthers 3-1, like you mentioned. I think the Panthers get 1 more, but they lose 4-2. I think they can push it to 6, but they are not a well-oiled machine right now. And I shouldn't even say that where they're not a well-oiled machine. Boston is just, not surprisingly, they're just too good.
Boston's good, and their depth is insane. The Panthers, beyond Barkov, Kachuk, I mean, they just haven't had the contributions that Boston gets, right?
Yeah.
And Boston just they can come at you in waves. They can roll four lines. They each understand their role. They execute it. They get great goaltending, right? They've been the best team all year. The Panthers just can't match. I don't think they get another one. I think the series is done in 5.
Yeah. Wouldn't you have loved to see Ullmark and Kachuk go at it the other night, though? Oh, that would have been awesome. What a move by Taylor Hall in that game, by the way, too. That nice
was disgusting.
Yeah. Really nice. Like, I agree with you. I mean, Boston's got this one, whether it's 5 or 6. I think they're going to make short work-ish of Florida, to say the least. And then the last one, Toronto leading Tampa 2-1 at the time of recording. We're keeping an eye on this score here. Still 4-4 as far as I can see. 3 minutes in overtime. Why don't we do prediction time here real quick before we end up getting a winner here? I think the Leafs make it 3-1. I think they win tonight.
Tampa ties at 2-2.
Why am I not surprised? This Leafs team, though, especially after game 1, you didn't really know. They did not roll over and die. In fact, they've kind of put a stake in the ground and shown that they're for real a little bit here. If they're going to have a hiccup, I suppose game 1 is the place to have it versus the alternative from what we've seen in Leafs series in years past. This Lightning team, definitely not the powerhouse of yesteryear. I think that's the first thing to be said, but they've still been a formidable force here. These two teams in the first round have been must-watch hockey. Year in and year out. We just talked about the overtime finish, whatever it's going to be. Regardless, Nick, let's say it's 3-1 Leafs or 2-2 Lightning. Is this the year that the Leafs finally do it?
We both had the Leafs coming out of this series. Yeah. I still think that is the case. But again, Tampa, they've been there. They've done it. They've been in the final 3 straight years. Now, granted, that means they've also played a lot of freaking hockey. You kind of wonder if they've run out of gas, per se. I don't think that their bottom 6 is as good as it has been in years past. And mind you, they've had to recycle a lot of players over the Stanley Cup wins. And the fact that they've been doing that and still able to put together a solid playoff roster is still impressive to me. I still think that the Lightning, as an organization, regardless of what many people will call cap circumvention, just sits in with the rules, whatever, right? Go cry about it. I don't care. At the end of it, that's mighty impressive. It really is. And if they're able to tie this at 2, watch the Maple Leafs fans melt on Lake Ontario, because at the end of the day, they want it more. I think we all know, we've been saying it for 3 years now, that this is the last year, then changes have to be made. And we're talking big changes. You kind of get the sense that they're not going to get another, get out of jail free card after this one if they fail in round 1. And when you have to go up against a team that's been in the Cup final, winning 2 of them in the past 3 years, that's a tall order no matter what's on the ice. So I'll say this: if the Leafs go up 3-1, they will have this series. If they tie the series 2-2, then guess what? Yeah, I think Tampa will shock the world.
Leafs are on the power play right now. Should be interesting. But while we're stalling time we'll stall time for 2 minutes. How's that sound? Does that sound like a nice time that somehow coincides with certain things? Just a quick little flip over, like we talked about, Iowa losing to Rockford in the AHL best of 3 first round here. Iowa, Tucson, Ontario, and Bakersfield on the western side of things. And then Lee Valley, Springfield, and Laval have all lost in that best of 3 first round here. So the actual normal playoff bracket, so to speak, now similar to the NHL, has now been set. Texas playing Rockford. Texas is the number 1 seed in that bracket. Milwaukee playing Manitoba. That'll be a good series. And then number 1 Calgary playing number 4 Abbotsford, and number 3 Colorado playing number 2 Coachella Valley and the Firebirds. On the eastern side of things, Charlotte ended up playing Hershey now with their victory as the 2 and 3 seeds. Number 1 Providence getting number 6 Hartford. And then Toronto gets the winner of that play-in, Utica, as the 4 spot, and Syracuse has Rochester right now. So keep an eye on those as the AHL playoffs. They seem to start a shade later or take a little bit longer to kind of get going in the NHL, but then they kind of resolve themselves as we approach the Stanley Cup final bracket with their pacing as well too. So the AHL brackets, interesting. A lot of teams that kind of, you look at that honestly in the sense of the NCAAs a little bit, and maybe do they employ something like that where teams kind of have that little bracket where they can kind of try to make their way in over the course of a single game or a weekend or something. I don't really know either if that's something. Oh, by the way, how about this, Nick? 3-1. The Maple Leafs lead this series against the Tampa Bay Lightning.
There you go.
Game winner coming in overtime from, as we wait for it to load here, Game winner coming from Alexander Kerfoot, unassisted on the power play at 4:14 of overtime. So,
Oh boy. Uh-oh.
How do we feel about the Leafs now?
Well, do I have to say it? They've had 3-1 series leads and have blown it. So
I agree with you. Like you said, they're going to get it done.
I still think they'll get it done, but I still think it's going to take at least till game 6, game 7 to do it. Because you just, again, you can't count out this Tampa Bay Lightning squad, and they'll push to the end. And again, when the pressure's been on the Leafs, they've somehow found ways to lose the game rather than to actually cement themselves for the next round.
You know, the Leafs are in the best and worst possible spot. If the Maple Leafs lose this first round series, Toronto will like not exist on the map anymore. Like literally, that's
they'll implode.
Yes, they have to get it done. They have to. They like it's not. They should.
They'll sink into Lake Ontario, the whole city.
Yeah, they need to get it done here. Think about if they would have played a little bit better in game 1, though. You know.
Yeah.
How about the fact that the Leafs could have potentially swept this series?
They could have.
Yeah.
I mean, but at the end of it, again, Tampa.
Overtime finishes too, though. A couple of them for the Leafs, by the way. Kudos to them. Something that they've come in clutch with. Like you mentioned, they haven't in recent years. But the NHL playoffs offering a lot of intrigue. Of course, the second round should start around Tuesday on May 2nd. Maybe on the 1st if you have some series that wrap up a little bit early. But for sure, the 2nd will be the start of the second round in the National Hockey League playoffs. For Nick Maxon, I am Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the Den for episode 160.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Permix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL!
Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.